History remembers Rome as a symbol of power, discipline, and civilization. But behind the marble statues and the glory of conquest, there were acts so disturbing, so brutal, that even some Romans themselves tried to erase them from memory. This is the dark truth of the Roman army, the side history doesn't like to talk about. The armies of ancient Rome were feared across the world. Disciplined soldiers, unmatched strategy, unstoppable expansion. But when these legions marched into foreign lands, they didn't just conquer territory. They controlled people's bodies and lives, and what they did to captives was often worse than death. When a city fell to Roman forces, the survivors rarely saw freedom again. Men were forced into brutal labor. Women and children were sold into slavery. Entire populations were chained and marched across miles. After the destruction of Carthage, tens of thousands were sold like livestock. Families were separated forever. Mothers never saw their children again. To Rome, people weren't human. They were spoils of war. Roman soldiers had full power over prisoners. There were no laws protecting the defeated. Captive women were often taken as personal property. But it didn't stop there. Young boys were also abused. Power meant control, and control meant ownership over another human's body. These acts were rarely punished, because in war, the enemy wasn't seen as human. Victory in Rome wasn't just about winning. It was about showing dominance. Captured leaders were dragged through the streets in chains. Crowds cheered as defeated kings were displayed like animals. During triumph parades, generals showed off their prisoners as trophies. One of the most famous victims was Vercingetorix. After leading a rebellion against Julius Caesar, he was paraded through Rome, then executed. For the Romans, humiliation was part of victory. Some prisoners were not killed immediately. Instead, they were turned into entertainment. The arenas of Rome became places of suffering. Captives were forced to fight as gladiators. Others were thrown to wild animals. Untrained, unarmed, terrified. Crowds watched as they were torn apart. For the audience, it was just another day of entertainment. Perhaps the most terrifying punishment was crucifixion. It wasn't just execution. It was a warning. Victims were nailed or tied to wooden crosses and left to die slowly, sometimes for days. The pain was unbearable, but the real purpose was to send a message. Defy Rome, and this will be your fate. After slave revolts, thousands were crucified along roads, their bodies left to rot, as a reminder of Roman power. If a city dared to resist, the punishment was brutal. Roman armies often killed entire populations. Men, women, and children. No mercy. When Jerusalem rebelled, the Roman response was devastating. Thousands were killed. The city was destroyed. Survivors were enslaved. Rebellion wasn't just defeated, it was erased. The Romans understood fear. They used it as a weapon. Villages were burned. Bodies were displayed. Prisoners were tortured in public. The goal wasn't just victory, it was control. If people were afraid enough, they wouldn't fight back. The brutality didn't stop with enemies. Roman soldiers faced terrifying punishments too. If a unit showed cowardice, they could face decimation. Every 10th man was executed by his own comrades. Imagine standing in line, waiting to see if you would die at the hands of your brothers. Discipline in Rome was absolute. Rome called itself civilized, but its power came at a cost. Behind every victory were stories of suffering. Behind every triumph were countless lives destroyed. The empire didn't just conquer land. It dominated people in the most brutal ways imaginable. The Roman army built one of the greatest empires in history, but it also left behind a legacy of cruelty, a reminder that power can easily become abuse, and that history often hides its darkest truths behind glory. If you want to uncover more hidden stories from history, stories they never taught in school, subscribe now, because the past is darker than you think.